When I was a boy, I met a statue that wasn't a statue at all. If you want the polite version, I'll say I saw something I can't explain. If you want the version that kept me up for decades, I'll tell you this. There's a presence in a Baltimore cemetery that watches the path between the living and the dead. And sometimes it steps across to remind you which side you're on. My name is Evan Miles, and I grew up on the southwest side of Baltimore, a few blocks from Loudon Park Cemetery. If you're from Maryland, you've heard the legends. Folks argue about which place is the real source. Some say Druid Ridge with its famous mourning figure, the one our books call Grief. Others swear the stories started in our side of town, with a different angel high on a rise, book in her lap as if the dead had left her notes to read. Names change. Claims change. The one constant is the feeling you get, standing alone among the mausoleums when the wind snakes through the iron fence and your breath decides it would rather hide in your lungs than leave your body. My mother, Ruth, loved those stories the way some people love spicy food. She piled them on when no one asked and doubled down when we protested. If you rolled your eyes, she'd sweeten the pot with another detail, another warning, another twist she swore came straight from a groundskeeper or a neighbor's uncle. My father, Victor, didn't talk much. He had a quiet streak and a mischief streak, and these two parts of him were often partners in crime. We visited the cemetery like it was a family park. There were reasons the grandparents' stones, the little patch of ground where my mother's oldest sister lay, but there was something else too, an ease in my parents, sitting on the low wall with coffee and letting time slow down. In those hours, Loudon Park didn't feel like a place where life ended. It felt like somewhere life could finally take a breath. I was the youngest by several years. My brother, Caleb, had already perfected the older sibling craft of inventing trials I would fail at. Who could cross a row of graves without touching the grass? Who could whistle near the angel without her hearing? Who would dare count backward from midnight in front of the mausoleum, shaped like a little church, and not lose their voice in the middle? My sisters played along or didn't, depending on mood. But the point was never the game. The point was what happened after. What happened after, more often than not, was that my parents would wait until I'd wandered a good ways off toward the angel reading, or down the slope into the wooded glen, or up the road where it curved and fell out of sight. Then they would leave. Not really. They'd drive just far enough that I couldn't see the silver Ford anymore. They'd kill the engine so I couldn't hear the idle. They'd move slow like hunters so the sound of their tires didn't carry. And they'd wait. Every single time I panicked. Every single time I felt heat in my throat and cold in my fingers. It took no more than a minute for the wind to seem like whispering and the tall marble to lean, inch by inch, toward me. When the Ford finally rolled back into view, me mother laughing, my father claiming it was all her idea, I'd pretend to be mad while my pulse learned how to be a pulse again. It's easy to condemn that now, and maybe you're right too. But what that ritual did besides sour the smell of cut grass for years was carve a hollow in me. The exact shape of being left. When something looks into you, it finds the hollows first. I remember precisely the afternoon my life changed because the light on the angel's book looked like black water. I was 11 or 12, old enough to tell myself I wouldn't cry and young enough to believe I could promise anything to my future self. We'd wandered farther than usual. My parents lingered by the little church-like mausoleum at the bottom of the hill and sent me up to stretch my legs. I ended up beside the angel with the book, the one halfway up the incline, one hand under her chin like she was listening to words only stone can hear. I told you about my mother and her stories. She had given the angel a name and then traded it in when someone else's story offered a better rate. That day, for whatever reason, the old name rose up in me, and I said it aloud. Not as a challenge or a prayer, but as an observation a boy would make when he thinks no one is listening. She's beautiful, I said, to no one, to stone, To the wind. Something giggled. Not wind. Not stone. The sound was small and delighted and human, and it came from everywhere at once. I turned in a full circle, heart tripping, certain my mother had crept up or a sister had crouched behind a monument to catch me talking to a statue. Nothing. The hill was empty except for me and the angel. My name crept up the base of the statue letters my brother had noticed on some earlier visit and weaponized, claiming it stood for the horror that lived in my nightmares. I told myself I didn't believe him. The small hard ache under my ribs told me otherwise. The giggle turned again, somewhere down the slope where trees took over from the formal rows. I saw the shape. You'll think I'm about to say shadow person, and you'll be right and you'll be wrong. It was a woman, or the idea of one. More absence than presence. Black layers of robe or cloak gathered around her like she had carried the night with her across the fence. A hood. The sense of a face under it. Not menace exactly. More like authority. I felt two things at once that didn't fit together, protected and called to account. You expect the sensible answer here, that I ran. I didn't. This is the part of my life that still embarrasses me. I was a child, and beauty in any form that noticed me might as well have been a planet's gravity. I moved toward the woman the way leaves go toward water. And as I approached the glen, I lost sight of her among the trunks and the undergrowth and the angle of land. I had seen her near the old footbridge that crossed a narrow creek, a structure I'd crossed a dozen times without registering it as anything other than a shortcut. The creek had carved itself down, so from a distance the bridge looked like a low roof on stilted legs. "Hello?" I said. The sound slid under the bridge and came back to me with edges smoothed. The giggle returned, not from the trees now, but from under the bridge itself, from the little cool darkness where the creek lapped and the cement was slimed with green-black. I got on my stomach and peered in. Nothing there but a shelf where a person could sit hidden from anyone on the path. I understood, suddenly and completely, that there was a kind of joke in Thesa turnabout. If my parents loved to vanish and leave me to panic, this space under the bridge invited a different ending. The stone woman by the book had teased me towards sanctuary. I climbed down the slope to the water and slid under the bridge and sat with my back to the cool concrete. The giggle didn't come again. The quiet did. It wasn't ordinary quiet. It had weight, like a blanket in a cold room, like someone putting a hand on your shoulder and standing with you without saying a word. I waited. Eventually, I heard my mother's voice across the glen, my name sharp in the air, and I crawled out and headed back up, making sure to take my time so the lesson would stick. She scolded me in the car for wandering off, as if that hadn't been the game for years. I asked, as neutrally as an 11-year-old could, if she enjoyed the game more now that she had to work for it. My father drove. His mouth fought a smile. For the first time, the joke didn't land for them. For the first time, I had not been the punchline. That evening in bed, I whispered thank you to the air and the wall and the darkness. I thought I was thanking the angle of a bridge and the luck of a hiding place. I wasn't. I was thanking an intelligence that had found the hollow in me and said, "This isn't a place to drown. It's a place to learn to breathe." Time moved. I learned to shave. I learned to keep secrets. I learned that the world is mostly people pretending to know what they're doing until they do. I also learned, on a Halloween night 2 years later, that courage and stupidity are cousins who share a coat. I was out on my own, pillowcase in hand, thrilled by the autonomy of a night no adult was tracking. I fell in with Caleb and his girlfriend Marina, plus 2 of his friends Ty and Brent, boys whose favorite jokes wore someone else's fear like a jacket. One of them suggested a shortcut through Loudon Park to get home. It wasn't my idea, but I wanted it to be. The cemetery felt like a place where the rules recognized me. Caleb and I caught each other's eyes when the suggestion landed. His look said, "They're going to try something." Mine said, "Let them." We cut through a gap in the iron fence where a section had bent outward. The kind of place kids discover and pretend they discovered. Streetlight glare gave way to near dark as if a hand had covered the bulb. Our sneakers found the first crunch of gravel and then the softer hush of grass. We headed toward the angel with the book because my mother had planted that path in all of us. If there was a focal point for the stories she'd told, it was that rise. I peeled away before the others reached the slope and threaded the trees toward the creek. It was a habit now. If there was a center of gravity in that cemetery for me, it was the bridge and what lived near it. I wasn't in costume by accident. I'd gone as a zombie. Makeup smeared and shirt torn. Because I wanted what came next to feel like theater. The plan was stupid and elegant. Hide behind a stone near the angel and reach out to grab the ankle of whichever boy scoffed the loudest. It worked. Ty nearly swallowed his tongue. Brent shouted a word he didn't know the meaning of in a voice higher than he thought possible. They exploded back from me, then gathered themselves and came on like kids do when shame needs a target. I ran, joy bright in my chest, down the slope toward the mausoleum and beyond that toward the deeper dark. The moon had heft that night. A gibbous-white thumbprint smudged across the sky. The mausoleum was beautiful and wrong and perfect in that light. I thought I saw movement at one of its small windows, perhaps Brant's shadow. Perhaps Nodhan turned hard toward the path that led to the bridge. Behind me, the boys hesitated. Even at 16, something in your spine knows what darkness is yours and what isn't. I slid under the bridge. Their footsteps pounded across it and then stopped. Voices debated in low, urgent whispers. Marina told Caleb to let me be. Someone asked where I'd gone. Someone else said the mausoleum. Then one of them, Ty, by the sound, said, "Nope," in a tone people use when their older selves are trying to save them. Silence. If I had a talent back, then it was confusing silence for safety. I climbed up the far embankment, motivated to taunt a little before I made for the main road and the yawning, welcoming light. I stood. She stood. The night had collected again in the shape of a woman, robe heavy to the ground, hood low. The moon and a far-off street lamp made a halo that wasn't a halo. I froze mid-breath, as if bone were a liquid and sight had turned it to glass. Protection and judgment slammed together like two doors closing at once. I had always assumed she had been on my side. Now I felt how arrogant that had been. Her head lifted, the hood's shadow tilting. I saw eyes. Red. Yes, but not the neon red of cheap Halloween. The red of ember when a log collapses on itself. The red of boundaries enforced by someone who understates nothing. Those eyes held me as if the creek were an ocean and I had swum to my limit. Why anger? The question rose unbidden and landed in my gut with the obvious answer. Because I had made her into my accomplice. Because I had used the place she tended as a set for a prank. Because I had mistaken mercy for permission. My legs argued with each other about whether to stay or flee and settled on neither. From up the slope, I heard Caleb calling. He sounded unlike himself, afraid not of the dark, but of losing me in it. The sound cracked something in me open. And all the years of being left, of watching the Ford slip out of sight, poured into the present. I did what people do when the present and the past collide. I cried. Nothing happened. The woman did not close the distance. She did not reach out with hands I'm not sure she had. She did not stride down the bank to claim me. The night lightened by a degree. The red dimmed to the warmer dull of coals settling. The robe became the absence between branches. I heard an owl. The creek regained its small, repetitive voice. I knew how to move again. I slogged up toward the voice that knew my name like it belonged to both of us. Caleb found me, and he and Marina bracketed me with their bodies in that unconscious way families do when the world is too large. The other boys were nowhere visible. Later I would learn they had fled at the same instant I had seen the eyes. Later I would consider the economy of that. Before we left, I did something that would have embarrassed me a year earlier and annoy me a year later. I climbed back up to the angel's rise. The marble woman looked as she always did. The book open, one hand under her chin in permanent consideration. I touched the stone where her foot nudged from beneath the hem. "I'm sorry," I said. Then I kissed that bit of granite as if it were an altar and turned away before my brother could get the joke out. We walked out through the gap in the fence and down the street. The night resumed its ordinary work of being night. On the porch, my father pretended to read. My mother pretended she hadn't worried. I showered, slept, and woke with the kind of clarity a hangover sometimes gives, though there was no alcohol, only the remains of fear burning off. It's convenient to end a story at its most cinematic point. But life isn't a single crescendo followed by credits. It's an uneven series of reminders. In the years that followed, I saw the robed woman again, never closer than the edge of a place I shouldn't cross, never nearer than the distance kindness keeps to avoid becoming interference. Once, she appeared in the reflection of a bedroom window when a fight had gone too far and I had said words to someone I loved that couldn't be unsaid. Once, in a hospital hallway outside a door with too much silence behind it. She was the geometry of shadow where the floor met the wall. Twice, driving alone late at night. She was the shape the guardrail took. She meant the same thing each time. I am here. Remember what makes you worth keeping. I never told my mother. Stories were her currency, and I didn't trust what inflation would do to mine in her hands. I told Caleb once, years later, when we stood by our father's grave and the wind failed to move the leaves for the first time all day. He didn't laugh. He put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed once and said, "I think she's been to my place too." That was enough. It is reasonable to wonder what. Exactly. I think that woman is. I've tried on every word I can think of and found each too small. If I say spirit, you picture one thing. If I say guardian, you picture another. If I say hallucination, you nod with the satisfaction of a solution. If I say angel, the story becomes someone else's property. So I'll name her what she was for me, the woman by the creek. She was grief's cousin and justice's aunt and mercy with a strict voice. She watched the border and made sure the ones who crossed did so with intention. She did not punish me for a boy's meanness, but she made sure I felt the weight of the place I had made light of. If you go looking for her, I don't know if she'll come. I suspect she's like weather. She arrives because conditions deserve her. But if you ever stand under a bridge where a cemetery's water remembers the names it passes, and if you've brought with you the hollow that being left carved, and if you've also brought the desire to be decent even when no one's watching, then maybe you'll hear a laugh, small and warm, calling you not to bravery, but to better behavior. I live a few miles away now, on a street that welcomes the morning with buses and dogs and the smell of toast. I pass Loudon Park more than I go in. The people I love are mostly on the side of grass where I can reach them. But sometimes, when the day doesn't entirely make sense, I park by the fence at dusk and walk in. The road bends the same. The monuments resist the same. The angel still reads. The bridge holds. The creek speaks softly of its only topic. Not long ago, after a year that seemed to narrow at both ends, I went to the footbridge at last light and sat under it in the cool. I thought about the kid I'd been, about the prank, about the way shame and humor shake hands across a lifetime. I thought about my parents and how easy it is to judge and how hard it is to love a child, well, if no one ever loved you that way first. I thought about how much noise in this world asks to be called truth, and how many truths sit down quietly and wait for you to notice them. I didn't hear the giggle. I didn't see the robe. I sat for a time that felt like exactly long enough, then stood and brushed off my jeans and climbed the bank. I turned once to the line of the trees and the way they made a door and saw nothing. I didn't feel disappointed. On the walk back to the fence, I passed the angel on her rise. The book on her lap wasn't open to a page. It wasn't open at all. It was stone. The idea of a book. That's what all this is. In the end, our ideas of things. My mother engineered fear and called it fun. My father engineered silence and called it strength. I engineered a prank and called it winning. The woman by the creek engineered a pause and called it mercy without using the word. If you want a moral, I can give you one that fits on a card. The dead aren't props. The places we keep them aren't stages. The living carry responsibilities that begin, not end, when the sun goes down. The statue's eyes do not follow you because stone has muscles. They follow you because you have made something in yourself that can be followed. I am older now, and I prefer ends that land rather than drift. So here is the landing. I believe I will see her when my life's hallway leads to a door that opens once. Don't mistake that for fear. I think she'll be as she was. Neither friend nor enemy, but present enough to keep me from forgetting how to cross. I think she will be involved because involvement is what she has always offered. And if she laughs soft and delighted and human, I hope I have the good sense to laugh a little, too. Until then, I will try not to run pranks in the company of the dead. I will try to keep my promises to whatever child I am still raising inside. The one who spent so many afternoons learning how to recognize a car by the sound of its engine coming back. And if you, reading this, go there one day, if you stand on that bridge at night and look down and see only water, if you look up and see only trees, if you say out loud that beauty counts and you mean it, then maybe you'll feel the same thing I felt. Safety with sharp edges. Forgiveness that expects something of you afterward. That is what watched me. That is what I am trying, even now, to watch back. This story brushes against hard questions. Where's the line between harmless pranks and emotional violence? What do we owe the dead and the living when we walk through spaces of grief? Have you witnessed or experienced jokes that left lasting scars? Do you see justice in what happened to Evan? Or do you think he exaggerated the harm? Share your thoughts below, especially your stance on everyday cruelty, accountability, and how we should treat places of mourning. Do you believe in guardians like the woman by the creek? Or are these just the stories we tell to correct our worst impulses? Your perspective matters.